everything in the universe, both animate, living, and inanimate, all have some sort of intelligence associated with it. When a worm is split in half and both sides live, you're not splitting the spirit or the soul of a worm in half, but the intelligences of said worm are now divided and both sides live on. Even though they were once bonded together, they're now separate. Some intelligences are more dominant than others. For example, I do not have a single intelligence in me, but perhaps millions or trillions or more intelligences. Some of them are dominant and others are more secondary or subservient or lesser intelligences, though they're all still a part of me. Individual cells, red blood cells, good bacteria, etc., all help to make me who I am and obey more dominant intelligences, which are perhaps primarily in control. This can similarly be related to a government. There are millions of people in the United States, but the majority of us aren't making the laws or decisions. Perhaps in large numbers we can affect results or sway the direction our government takes to some degree, but unfortunately there are other individuals and groups more in control than any individual citizen. The individual is part of the country, but the government has the most control over the country. Similarly, individual intelligences are part of me, but there are dominant intelligences and groups of intelligences that are primarily in control of me, and other intelligences that make up me. Hence, when a worm's cut in half, no spirit is split, just the intelligences pertaining to it become divided into two separate groups. As the two individual halves now begin to heal and regrow themselves, new intelligences join up with them and become subservient to the dominant ones, so to speak, in each individual half. And thus each half is still its own separate entity, two separate collections of intelligences now that used to be a single collection and is now divided. Each half now has added new intelligences separately from the original collection, not unlike what happens when identical twins split. The identical twin first starts as the same cell, and as it divides, it still remains the same entity for a while. When it eventually splits off from itself, and the becomes two separate halves. The intelligence is split the same way as the worm. They continue to grow, and etc., etc. In the case of the worm, both halves continue to grow and gain new intelligences separately from each other, but experiences all stop being equally shared. Both halves will still have different, some of the same preferences from the original entity that from when they shared the same experiences, but if one half of the worm gains a new preference or experience as well, it will not carry over to the other half of the worm because they're no longer sharing. So we can understand what is God. Every intelligence, both living and inanimate, are a part of God, so to speak, in the same way that we are a part of a country, and the same way that cells and multiple intelligences are part of us. I believe that we are a part of God. The whole universe is made up of intelligences, which make up God. Elements, etc., all obey God because they have intelligences associated with them as a part of God and are subservient to the dominant intelligences of God, just like how the minor intelligences in me are subservient to my dominant intelligences, which is why my body and molecules and cells in my body obey according to my overall will. My fingers type because I will them to type. My lungs breathe because I will them to breathe. Weather doesn't obey me because it is not subservient to me. Mountains do not move at my will because we're not bonded that way. Mountains may move at God's command because they are figuratively part of his little pinky, and thus his pinky bends at his will, just as mine does when I will my pinky to bend. I mean, yes, the mountain is a part of God, and I am a part of God, but just as my pinky is a part of my hand, and thus a part of me, it would not be considered a part of my foot. So, while I may be an appendage of God of sorts, and the mountain a part of God, with this analogy, even as a foot, I don't have control to ask the pinky finger to move. The flaws in this analogy are irrelevant and used only to help explain that all things are individually part of God. Even if there is some old man with a white beard as a dominant personal God or personal gods, Godhead, Council of Gods, etc. They're simply a dominant collection of intelligences which make up a part of the God, the whole collection, similarly to how we make up a part of our individual country, which also makes up a part of this earth, which is a part of the universe, bonded collections of intelligences. The ultimate collection of intelligences equals God. Some lesser intelligences change bonded groups frequently, especially in those associated with life forms, which often change states and get assimilated by other groups of intelligences. You don't destroy intelligence just as you can't destroy matter. You can change it from one form to another or associate it with another group, but they remain forever a part of the entity of God. Let's say an intelligence is associated with a bacteria and gets eaten by a worm, which is then eaten and assimilated by a fish, which gets eaten and becomes part of a bird, which is eaten and becomes part of a bear. It may no longer be a bacteria or a worm or a fish or a bird as it once was, but it's still part of the God and was never destroyed or killed. It simply changed functions or jobs in God, just as we change possibly functions or jobs in our individual country or government or however you want to see it. What if God was one